The M1955 flak jacket, or flak vest, however you want to call it, is an object of desire to the vast majority of both Vietnam War reenactors as well as Vietnam War collectors. Not only are these a very iconic piece of US Marine Corps equipment used throughout the entire war, but they're also practically, and for all intents and purposes, a requirement for you to put one of those impressions together, which already gives USMC kids a bit of a barrier of entry. Chances are, if you've actually clicked on this video, you may have yourself thought about going out and putting together one such impression, done an ounce of research and found out that M55s come in a very wide and colorful array of prices. For example, a first pattern flak jacket like this one can cost you from $400 and upwards, which in today's economy is not a menial amount of money. Obviously, there are differences in terms of price depending on what kind of pattern of vest we're actually talking about. You know, a first pattern vest like this one is not going to cost the same as a second pattern or a third pattern Okinawan. Even then, actually being able to find one of these out in the wild is admittedly pretty challenging. As mentioned before, these are sought after and desirable, which means that collectors will have a tendency to keep these for the foreseeable and not sell them very often. This just means that if you actually want to go out and get one of these, you have to play the long game, which means staying 100% locked into Facebook selling groups and eBay and whatever else for one of these to actually come up for sale. And if they do come up for sale, you will need to pray to the surplus gods so that the flak is the right size, is in the right condition, because you're gonna have to wear it after all, the right price, so you don't have to get a mortgage to actually be able to buy one of these, as well as the right pattern, because depending on what pattern of vest you get, you're kind of limited to a specific period of time. Reproductions of these flags did used to exist back in the day, and they were made by Reaper Papasan. However, he doesn't really make those anymore, which means that if you want to get one of these and there's none currently available in the market, you are just SOL. Until very recently, however. Through the magic of Facebook, I actually found out that there is someone making repros of these flak vests. And matter of fact, they don't just make M55s, but they make most of the vests used during the war. And that includes the M52, the M52A, and the 3/4 color, as well as all the patterns of M55, including first, second, and third. That did pique my interest, and I thought that was interesting. However, I didn't really know the seller, I hadn't seen one out in the wild, and I didn't really know what to expect in terms of quality. So I bought one. These flaks are made by Kame? I don't know. I'm just going to call it Kame House Workshop. It's a guy on Facebook, and it's actually a single man operation. It's just one person making these flags out of Taiwan, which I think is pretty impressive given that it's one guy making these and the quality of the product they're actually able to ship out. For you to get one of these, you actually need to contact him on Facebook, ask him what pattern you want, pay it, and then he'll actually go out and make it to order and ship it within the next 1 to 2 months, depending on the workload, because the guy has other things to do. Now, having received mine, I thought it would be very interesting to make a bit of a comparison between the real thing and the reproduction. Though one thing that I do want to point out before we start with the actual comparison and review is the fact that even himself, the guy that makes these flags, does admit that these are made with more modern materials and may not be 100% accurate, but he just wanted to create a more affordable version of these flags for people that want to reenact US Marines, which I think is a pretty commendable point, and it is something that I do want to keep into account while we actually go with the review. So let's just start with it and have a bit of a closer look. First of all, the M55 provides ballistic protection to its user in 2 different ways. The very top of the vest is composed of 13 layers of ballistic nylon, and the bottom half of the vest is composed of 23 overlapping plates of Doron, Doron basically being a kind of fiberglass. It is worth noting that depending on the size of the vest, there's going to be more or less plates. Size mediums have 23 plates. Out of those 23 plates, 2 of them are actually placed kind of in the middle of the vest, which are supposed to give a bit of extra protection to your most vital organs, those being the lungs and the heart. At heart, these vests were not designed to stop all kinds of small arms fire. They were really conceived with the idea of stopping slow-moving projectiles, such as fragmentation from grenades, mortars, and such kinds of implements. Hence the name fragmentation vest, or as we tend to shorten it, flak jacket. That's the original though. The question now is, does the reproduction come with any of that space-age ballistic nylon and Doron plates, and is it going to protect you against any kind of fragment? No, no, the answer is no. If you get hit with one of these, you will die. These are, reproductions, and they will not offer you any kind of ballistic protection. I feel very sad having to say this, but this is the internet, and I don't trust any of you. The good thing, however, is that actually the filling is pretty well reproduced. We do have hard, solid plates that are about the right shape, and they will stick out correctly out of the sides of the vest when worn, which gives you that kind of correct look. And I think over time they will get nicely worn out, and you will actually see the outline like you do on the originals. The top half, however, has a very kind of spongy foam thing, which still looks okay. It puffs it out like an original, but it is rather squishy and very light. This does mean that when you wear it, of course, it's not going to feel the same as an original flak vest, and the weight is substantially different. But at least in terms of looks, it's actually pretty good. The overall color of the shell on the reproduction is relatively close to an original, though I hope this does come across on camera and we can see that the reproduction has more of a green shade, whereas the original has more of a khaki shade to it. I know there's also the early variants of the first patterns, which are forest green, but this is still definitely not forest green. This is more of an OD7 color to it. I'm guessing that over time, though, once it's faded and worn out, it will likely start kind of getting to this color. In terms of the material, the Repro is made with a completely 100% synthetic material, whereas the original is more of a cotton blend. The material on the Repro is lighter, whereas the original is a bit heavier in weight, but the weave is thankfully pretty much the same, and it's not a very noticeable difference. Having a quick look at the top of the vest, we can see that this features a collar, which is an improvement over the M52, and this is pretty well reproduced. It is made out of a heavier, coarser synthetic material than the shell itself, and it is pretty nicely padded. Speaking of improvements over the M52, the first pattern introduced the shooter's cord, which is there to stop slings as well as buttstocks of rifles from slipping off of the shoulder when actually in use. Now, the one on the reproduction is pretty well reproduced, it's pretty well made. I don't see it tearing out anytime soon. However, there's some discrepancies in the way it's actually made. First of all, it should be a little bit longer, kind of going down here. And the way it's finished, the stitching down here being horizontal, is more reminiscent of the shooter's cord on an Okinawan flag. Additionally, there should be a line of stitching kind of going through the side all the way down to the base and extending, kind of protruding down to about here. Speaking of stitching, there's a couple of stitches up here that I've also not seen on a first pattern or a second pattern vest, such as this one right here, as well as this one right here, but I have seen it on Okinawan vests. This is small potatoes, this is kind of stitch counting, but I felt it was worth noting. The M55 features a breast pocket, which can hold things like notebooks, magazines, or even cigarettes, and also has this little pocket on the side here, which is supposed to hold things like pens and pencils. On the reproduction, a 20-round magazine fits just fine, I would say with a fair bit of play, but so does an original. Worth noting that the pocket is actually stitched up a bit too high up on the chest. It should be a bit lower down, which makes the pocket a bit deeper than an original. And visually, you can tell that this is a bit higher up because the base of the pocket should actually be a bit lower, and the stitching that holds the plate system in place should be overlapping on the edge of the pocket. It is a small observation, but I felt it was worth noting. As you have likely noticed, on the inside of the vest there is a tag, which is always nice to see. And text-wise, it is virtually the same as the original. However, the font, especially on the body, is a little iffy. However, this is on the inside of the vest, so it's really not that big of a deal. On the bottom of the tag, we can also see reproduced props, which basically implies that this vest is a reproduction, which is, that's the case, and it's good to have it on there in case some sort of unscrupulous eBay seller tries to pass one of these off as original, which would be bad, as well as the date of manufacture stamped at the bottom. We can also see M, in this case being medium, the size of this vest, and Kame makes all sizes. They make small, medium, large, and extra large, which is nice. However, I would encourage people not to buy small-sized M55s because those actually didn't exist. Just like an original, the reproduction features a front flap with 4 sets of snaps, as well as a zipper for closure. The flap itself feels fairly light and pretty thin, but this is due to, again, the overall material that the vest is made out of being lighter and thinner than the original, therefore making this be just a bit floppier when undone. The snaps themselves are serviceable, they're not dot snaps. The male snaps do feel a little bit on the cheap side, but they both seem solid and I haven't had any issues with them yet. I would hope they would be able to withstand some abuse, and in the meantime they should be serviceable. The zipper itself, however, is actually really nice. They managed to get the exact same style of tug as well as the exact same size of zipper, which is a great detail. It works very smoothly. I don't have any concerns about that. There are some discrepancies in terms of the material on the sides of the zipper. It is just a bit coarser and has a different weave, but again, relatively minor. And they've also gone out and reproduced the little tug at the bottom of the vest, which should help you zip up the vest. Though again, worth noting that the actual tug itself is just a little bit narrower than an original. And now we get to what I would personally consider to be the weakest element on this vest, that being the webbing. Now, the webbing on the original vests is supposed to be there so you can attach any kind of pouch with M1910 hooks to the bottom of the vest, whether it's, I don't know, bayonet scabbards, canteen pouches, 3-cell grenade pouches, JFACs, you name it, and kind of allow you to have your own self-contained webbing whilst wearing the vest only. The overall form factor of the reproduction is admittedly really close. The weave of the material is very similar. The amount of eyelets is also correct. However, there's some very big discrepancies in terms of the material used. This is made out of a completely synthetic material, I believe nylon, whereas the original is made out of cloth. This means that the overall feel, the color, as well as the kind of shine that the material has is very, very different to how it would look on an original. Additionally, the actual eyelets are, silvery and unfinished, whereas the originals are blackened brass. It's not the end of the world. I don't have many doubts about durability at this stage, but admittedly, it is a pretty glaring difference between the original and the reproduction, and if I were to give feedback to Kame, it would be to try to change the webbing to a more authentic material than nylon. Another thing that I wanted to mention that has personally really impressed me is the fact that the way these are built on the inside is surprisingly close to an original, down to having the exact same style of webbing reinforcement, which should attach it to the shell a bit better and hopefully give it a bit more durability, as well as having the exact same plate and strap system as an original. This just goes to show that they've taken an original, they've inspected the way it was built and kind of applied it to the reproductions, which is really cool. And we're not seeing these details because they're on the inside. And I honestly think that's a very commendable thing to do. It's a very, very nice detail. The back of both of the vests looks pretty uninteresting at first glance. But if we look into it a little deeper, we may start noticing a thing or two about the reproduction. Now, let's start with a bit of a counting exercise, so stick with me you guys, although it should be pretty easy to follow. On the original, I count 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 plates on the back. On the reproduction, I'm counting 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm not sure where the 5th plate went. It could be an issue of production, it may be an issue of the pattern they use being incorrect. Just keep that thought in mind. The other thing that you may have noticed, and may have thought that was a bit of an optical illusion, is the fact that the reproduction is a good inch shorter than the original, as you see down here. It's not an optical illusion like when you get two 30-round magazines and one is certainly a bit longer than the other one, at least it looks that way. No, it is not an optical illusion. It genuinely is a good inch shorter. Now, this gets really interesting when you put the reproduction side by side an Okinawan flag. We can now clearly see that the reproduction first pattern is very similar in size to an Okinawan. How bizarre, right? We know that Okinawans were made under different manufacturing guidelines, different contractors, which has led to a number of differences within Okinawan flags themselves, but also compared to American-made flags like the first and second pattern. Some of those differences include, of course, the size, as well as the overall cut, the rifle cords, as well as some of the stitching and the overall manufacturing processes. I think the puzzle pieces are kind of coming together now, and if you're following, you may have also remembered that we spoke about some elements on the reproduction that were very reminiscent of Okinawan flags. I feel pretty safe assuming that Kame got an Okinawan vest and actually used that to make patterns and make all the other M55s. Now, is that a big deal? It depends who you ask. If you're looking for a perfect product, which is something that we already mentioned off the get-go, that this wasn't exactly going to be, I can see that not being something of interest. In the defense of the reproduction, you have to know these things. You have to have an original next to it to be able to tell. You have to know the minutiae of the M55 to tell some of these differences apart. So I think it really comes down to your own personal preferences and what you're willing to compromise on and what you are not willing to compromise on. Additionally, regardless of what pattern of flak we're talking about, I want to use this time to highlight the fact that the plates overall on the reproduction are always a bit lower than on an original. So again, another difference, but you have to have an original next to it to really kind of notice that. Let's talk price really quick. The first patterns and the M52s cost about $199 a piece, whereas the second patterns and the third pattern Okinawans cost about $209. Now, I'm guessing the $10 increase is just due to the fact that those have pockets, and that is extra material and extra labor. Shipping to at least the UK was $40, so you're basically looking at somewhere within the $250 range, which you would be really lucky to find one of these shipped for $250. So I think it does have some pretty interesting value. In conclusion, are these reproductions worth it? Honestly, I would say that it really depends. If you're a reenactor that is just starting out, or God forbid you're someone that lives in a country where finding these is even more challenging than it already is, I think these can be a very interesting option. Not only are you skipping the search and the actual finding of the item, but you can get these in any size, in any pattern, and obviously the financial investment is not nearly as large as an original vest. But even then, stay with me now, I think that these can be something pretty useful for the more seasoned reenactor. Don't get me wrong, I think that for our main impressions, we should really strive towards perfection. Getting all the little details right and trying to use as much original material as we humanly possibly can. However, for the very niche occasional impressions that we may want to put together for a specific event or a specific season, I can see how these could be a somewhat interesting alternative. Say, for example, you're in an army group that only does army, but you're doing Marine Corps next event. Well, I can see how some people may struggle to justify going out and spending a sizable amount of money on a relatively niche piece of USMC equipment for a specific event or a specific season, especially if they don't know if they're going to use it afterwards. So this could potentially fill that niche and allow them to do those impressions with some ease. You're skipping again, same thing, the time that it will take you to find one. You can get any size, you can get any pattern, so you have that flexibility for specific events. Say you do, I don't know, Denang 1965, you get an M52, you can get a first pattern. You're doing Keisan, you can get an Okinawan or a first pattern, etc., etc. So for those specific settings, I think they can be very interesting. Additionally, if you go into an event that may have like a public battle, and you want to go hard on the flak and, dive in the mud or like destroy it, run into trees, brush, whatever, and you don't want to potentially go out and damage an original vest, I think these can also be a good beater for those kind of events where you don't want to have the pressure or you want to have peace of mind that you're not going to go out and, again, destroy a relatively expensive piece of equipment. Additionally, I believe that most of the value on these reproductions actually lie within the M52 repros as well as the first pattern M55 repros. Simply because those are going to be the ones that are the most expensive to actually go out and purchase in the collector's market nowadays, and the ones that are, in my opinion, the hardest to justify buying for very selected and specific events. But that's just my opinion. What I want to know now is, what do you think? Has this helped you make a decision? Were you thinking about buying one? Are you going to buy one? Are you not going to buy one? Did you have one already? How is it holding up? Do leave all of that down below, because I haven't really seen many reviews and I want to know what other people think or what other people's experience with these has actually been. If you have any other suggestions and things that you would like to see on the channel, any questions about these flak vests, do drop them below as well, and I'll be sure to have a bit of a look. I hope this has been very helpful to you guys, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.